are we doing the kind of research that we need on both vaccine development and distribution and access regarding hesitancy, access? Uh, we've even heard recently about vaccine convenience. What types of research are needed, both from a basic science or biological sense, and also in a public health and social service sense? Do you want to start off with that, Dr. Blackstock?
Oh, yeah, sure. There is like a whole field around health communications and health literacy, and it probably doesn't get enough attention until times like this. But even when you look at, and I hate that term vaccine hesitancy, because I don't think that's the case for everyone who is not uh, vaccinated. I think that there's a lot of nuance. I think that group is incredibly diverse in terms of regions, perspectives, backgrounds, political affiliations. And I think that actually what we've seen over the last few years is that, there's been, a spurt because of social media, but a burst in misinformation out there, increased distrust for the government, especially in this country. But if you actually look at globally, there's also increased mistrust towards vaccines and government as well. So it's not just something that is specific to the United States, but obviously hoping that we use this moment as a learning moment to realize that I think manufacturing the vaccines, while just an amazing feat, it's only one part of getting to vaccinations, right? To getting the vaccines into the arms of people, and really to understanding, what are people's concerns about the vaccine that would prevent them or from getting vaccinated. Obviously, the access is one issue, but we really just have to admit, especially in this country, that there is a segment of the population that does not want to get vaccinated. There are people who are adamantly against vaccines, and really there's no reasoning with them. But when the next pandemic happens, we're going to need to be able to engage with these communities, right? And we need to be thinking about that now as opposed to in the future.
Nina, are people at your institute and at Columbia preparing and doing the kind of research that we need for the next pandemic?
It's a great question. I mean, one thing I think we all need to pay more attention to is something called implementation research, which is, as we're rolling things out, how's it working and how can we improve how we're doing? I think business used to call it operations research, now in healthcare. So that's something I think has been underfunded, and there's a lack of attention to it sort of throughout the pandemic. On the research side, I mean, I work with a group called CEPI, which is part of COVAX, and they're focused really on investing in research. The idea is being able to produce a coronavirus vaccine within 100 days. So that's a great group looking at all sorts of capacities. And one thing I just wanted to mention too is this, I think a big part in the field that I work in is also this idea of distributed know-how. So how do we ensure that 10, 20, 15 years from now, ideally sooner, that there is knowledge generation, vaccine manufacturing, new technologies coming out of Africa? So not just what we call in vaccines fill finish, which means we send them the vats. I always talk about a vaccine manufacturing plant looks a lot like a mixture between a beer factory and a neonatal NICU, because everybody's in white suits, so it doesn't get contaminated, but it's like big beer vats. But so fill finishes, you can send the stuff and they can fill it and cap it, but that's not really it. So how can we also invest? And I think this is beginning to happen and should be part of the response, to invest in basic research and science capacity so that our major manufacturing is not Europe and the US, and to some extent now India, which is great, but also coming out. And so remembering that value chain is not just the end of it, the vaccines, but it starts with the basic science all the way through to the delivery.
Speaking of basic science, Ken, are companies like Moderna and others doing the right research for the next pandemic?
I don't know about the next pandemic. There's certainly the next pandemic could actually be a sub-pandemic of the current one if the wrong variant arises, and I think most of the work is being done on that. I think there's another thing that we should be thinking about for the next pandemic and even the variants. As I mentioned previously, there was exclusion of patients that had transplants, that were immunosuppressed, that cancer, that had other things which we know would blunt their immune response. And it's becoming increasingly clear, as some of those people have now been vaccinated, that they are not getting adequately protected by the current vaccines. They couldn't mount a high enough response. This is a special subgroup, probably accounts for maybe 4 or 5% of the patient population, but it's significant because those people see other people. They could easily catch a variant, and we need testing. And the testing needs to be able to address not just do you have antibodies, but are you actually protected? And to do that, you need to know the quantities of neutralizing antibodies. And there is technology that's being developed that will allow that to happen more cheaply and quickly. The technology exists and it's being developed by a number of different people. And so I think that's something to keep an eye on.